Have you ever wondered why some people collapse under pressure, while others awaken, sharpen, and become something almost unrecognizable to who they were before? Why the same stress that shatters one life seems to unlock a hidden strength in another, as if something ancient inside them suddenly stood up and said, "Now it's my turn." What if pressure was never meant to destroy you? What if it was designed to reveal something that only appears when comfort disappears? Most of your life feels quiet on the inside. Your body breathes, your heart keeps time, your thoughts loop in familiar patterns. Days blur together, weeks pass without friction. And beneath all of that calm routine, your DNA sits mostly silent, like a vast library with the lights turned off. Not empty, not inactive, just waiting. Waiting for a signal strong enough to justify opening doors that were never meant to be used casually. Stress arrives without asking permission. It tightens the chest, narrows the world, speeds the heart, distorts time. But beneath those sensations, something deeper begins to stir. Chemicals flood the bloodstream, hormones broadcast emergency messages, neural circuits reroute, systems that rarely speak to each other suddenly synchronize. And in that moment, your body stops behaving like a peaceful ecosystem and starts acting like a survival machine. Not because it wants to hurt you, because it wants to keep you alive. But survival is not just about muscles and reflexes. Survival is also about information, about memory, about adaptability. And that raises an unsettling question. If stress can reorganize the brain, recalibrate perception, and rewrite behavior, what else might it be capable of touching? Your DNA is not a static blueprint carved in stone. It is more like a living script, responsive to context, environment, and internal state. Every cell carries the same genetic text, yet different chapters are read depending on the situation. Calm reads one story, threat reads another. Long-term pressure, grief, isolation, or awakening states can shift which pages are opened and which are sealed shut. The code does not change, but access does, and access changes everything. Think of the moments when life forced you into a corner, when sleep became shallow, when time slowed or vanished, when your sense of self cracked, even slightly. In those moments, did you notice how perception sharpened, how certain details became painfully vivid while others faded into nothing? That is not weakness. That is the nervous system reallocating resources, deciding what matters and what does not. The body is ruthless with efficiency under pressure. It cuts noise. It amplifies signal. And here is where the question becomes dangerous. If the body can prioritize, suppress, and amplify entire systems under stress, why would DNA be exempt from that logic? Why would evolution design an organism that reveals all of its capabilities during peaceful conditions? When peace is historically rare, nature does not reward comfort. It rewards adaptability. It rewards systems that hold something in reserve. There are genes that only express under specific conditions, pathways that activate only when thresholds are crossed, cellular responses that remain dormant until the environment turns hostile. This is not speculation. This is biology. Stress response genes, repair mechanisms, immune adaptations, neural plasticity. All of it suggests that your body has layers of response it does not waste energy using unless it has to. But what if there are layers we don't fully understand yet? Not because they are mystical, but because they are conditional, locked behind experiences most people spend their lives trying to avoid. Pressure does something peculiar to identity. It strips away performance. It dissolves social masks. When survival is at stake, the brain stops caring about reputation, future planning, and abstract worry. It becomes present, immediate, focused. And in that narrowing, something else often appears, an observer, a quieter awareness behind the panic, the part of you that watches fear instead of drowning in it. That observer is not created by stress, it is revealed by it. The same may be true biologically. Across history, humans have endured famine, exile, war, collapse, and long periods of uncertainty. And yet the species did not merely survive, it adapted, it refined, it carried forward something learned in the dark. If stress were only destructive, humanity would not exist. The very fact that we are here suggests that pressure has always been part of the developmental process. Consider how muscles grow, not through comfort, but through resistance. Fibers tear, repair, and rebuild stronger than before. Bones thicken under load. Immune systems learn by being challenged. Even memory consolidates more powerfully when emotion is intense. The body does not grow in stillness. It grows in response. So what if there is a deeper response still? A layer of biological potential that does not emerge during safety, but during disruption. A set of instructions that activate only when the system is forced beyond its familiar limits. Not a mutation, not an upgrade, but an unveiling. This idea unsettles us because it reframes suffering, not as something noble or desirable, but as something informative. Not every form of stress awakens. Many forms damage. Many overwhelm. Pressure without recovery can fracture systems beyond repair, but that does not erase the pattern. It sharpens it. The difference between collapse and awakening may lie not in the pressure itself, but in how the system interprets it. Your body is constantly asking one question beneath consciousness. Is this environment survivable as I am now? If the answer is no, change becomes mandatory. And change, at the deepest level, requires access to tools not used before. People who emerge transformed from hardship often describe it the same way. A sense of clarity, a narrowing of fear, a feeling that something essential took control when everything else fell apart. They don't say they became someone new. They say they discovered something that was already there. Maybe that is not poetic coincidence. Maybe it is biological truth. What if stress is not just a signal of danger, but a key? A crude, painful key that forces open doors evolution never intended to be opened gently. Doors leading to altered perception, heightened awareness, emotional depth, resilience, and sometimes unsettling insight. Doors that stay closed during comfort because comfort does not demand them. And what if awakening is not a spiritual event separate from the body, but a physiological state that emerges when the nervous system, the mind, and the genome align under pressure? When the system realizes that the old configuration is no longer sufficient. This does not mean stress is good. Fire is not good for metal. But without fire, metal remains shapeless ore. Pressure does not create strength. It reveals structure. As this documentary unfolds, we will move deeper into the science, the biology, the psychology, and the unsettling implications of this idea. We will explore how genes respond to environment, how memory and trauma mark the body, how consciousness shifts under threat, and why awakening so often follows collapse. We will ask whether there are layers of human potential that remain inaccessible to a comfortable species, and whether the modern world, in trying to eliminate all discomfort, may be keeping those layers permanently locked. For now, sit with this thought. Perhaps the moments that nearly broke you were not random. Perhaps they were signals, invitations, tests you did not ask for, but ones your biology recognized immediately. Pressure might not be here to destroy you. It might be here to introduce you to a deeper version of yourself that only speaks when everything else goes quiet. Have you ever noticed how the body seems to know before the mind does? How, long before you can explain what's wrong, something inside you has already shifted its posture, its chemistry, its priorities. A tightening in the gut, a vigilance in the eyes, a sense that the world has changed its temperature. This is not imagination. This is the body switching modes, quietly deciding that the rules it lived by yesterday may no longer apply today. Beneath your awareness, biology is always listening. It listens to scarcity. It listens to threat. It listens to loss, to prolonged uncertainty, to environments that feel unsafe not just physically, but psychologically. And when those signals persist, something profound happens. The body stops optimizing for comfort and starts optimizing for survival. Not symbolically, literally. Your cells are not passive. They are responsive entities, each one capable of adjusting how it reads the same genetic code. The DNA inside you does not speak in a single voice. It whispers, shouts, pauses, and goes silent depending on context. What you experience as stress is translated into chemical language. Cortisol rises, adrenaline surges, inflammatory markers shift, neural pathways rewire, and these signals don't stop at muscles or mood. They travel inward toward the nucleus of the cell itself. This is where the idea of hidden switches becomes unavoidable. Within the genome are mechanisms designed to sense the environment and respond accordingly. Genes that remain inactive under stable conditions can become active when the body detects danger or sustained pressure. Other genes may quiet themselves to conserve energy. This is not chaos, it is strategy. The body reallocates resources the way a city does during a blackout, shutting down non-essential systems to keep the core alive. But survival mode is not merely about shutting things off. It is also about unlocking capacities that are unnecessary during peace. Think of how pain tolerance changes under stress, how exhaustion can be overridden in emergencies, how focus can become razor sharp when stakes are high. These are not miracles, they are features, latent capabilities that exist precisely because life has never been predictable. The unsettling part is this: many of these switches are not binary. They do not simply turn on and off. They recalibrate thresholds, they change sensitivity. They alter how much stimulus is required to provoke response. Over time, this reshaping can make a person fundamentally different from who they were before, not emotionally, but biologically. This is why two people can endure similar stress and emerge altered in opposite ways. One becomes brittle, another becomes grounded. One collapses inward, another expands outward. The difference may lie not in character, but in which switches were flipped, which pathways were reinforced, and which systems were given permission to lead. Modern biology has a name for some of this. It speaks of gene expression, regulatory networks, and cellular signaling, but names do not capture the experience of it. They do not explain why some individuals, after prolonged stress, report heightened awareness, deeper emotional range, sharper intuition, or a sense of internal clarity that feels almost alien compared to their former selves. What if these reports are not metaphors? What if they are descriptions of a system operating in a different configuration? Stress does not just inform the body that something is wrong, it informs the body that the future is uncertain. And uncertainty is one of the strongest evolutionary signals there is. When the future cannot be predicted, flexibility becomes more valuable than efficiency. Rigidity becomes dangerous. Systems that can reorganize quickly are more likely to survive than systems optimized for a single stable environment. So, the body loosens its grip on the familiar. Neural pathways that once dominated may weaken. Others may strengthen. Emotional responses recalibrate. Memory encoding shifts. Attention narrows or deepens. This reorganization can feel like losing yourself. But in another sense, it may be the system shedding configurations that no longer serve the current reality. Here is where existential reflection meets biology. If identity is partly a product of neural patterns and chemical states, then sustained stress is not just an experience, it is an identity-altering force. It presses the reset button on what the system considers normal, and once that reset happens, returning to the old version of yourself may no longer feel possible or desirable. This is why awakening so often follows breakdown. Not because breakdown is spiritual, but because breakdown forces the system to abandon illusions of control. When old strategies fail, deeper ones are invoked. When familiar narratives collapse, perception widens out of necessity. Some scientists describe this as adaptation. Some psychologists describe it as post-traumatic growth. Philosophers might describe it as confrontation with reality. But all of these descriptions circle the same truth. Pressure reorganizes the system, and reorganizing the system may require accessing layers that remain dormant under stable conditions. Consider how the immune system behaves. Exposure teaches it. Challenge refines it. Without stressors, it becomes naive. With overwhelming stress, it can turn against the body. Balance matters, context matters, timing matters. The same principle appears again and again across biological systems. There are thresholds beyond which new behaviors emerge. What if consciousness itself is subject to similar thresholds? What if the sense of self you identify with, most of the time, is simply the default configuration, optimized for routine social functioning? And what if stress pushes the system beyond that default, forcing awareness to expand, fragment, or recenter in unfamiliar ways? This could explain why people under extreme pressure sometimes report moments of profound clarity, time slowing, fear dissolving, a sense of being intensely present. These moments are often fleeting, but they leave a mark. They suggest that awareness has access to modes it does not normally inhabit, Again, this is not mystical speculation. It is consistent with what we know about how the brain reallocates resources under threat. The prefrontal cortex quiets, the limbic system activates, sensory processing intensifies. The present moment becomes dominant. Rumination about the future or past fades because it is metabolically expensive and evolutionarily useless in a crisis. But when such states persist, when stress is not momentary but is prolonged, the system must adapt or break. And adaptation often means building new defaults. This is where the idea of a forbidden layer becomes less about secrecy and more about conditional access. Not hidden because it is dangerous, but hidden because it is costly. It requires energy. It demands change. It destabilizes the familiar self. Comfortable systems do not evolve. Pressured systems do. And yet, there is a warning embedded here. Not all pressure awakens. Some damages irreversibly. Chronic stress without meaning, without recovery, without agency can erode the very systems it once activated. The same chemicals that sharpen awareness can, over time, corrode memory, mood, and health. So the question is not whether stress opens doors. It is which doors it opens, and whether the system survives the transition. As we move forward, we will begin to examine the mechanisms that decide this outcome. How experience leaves marks on biology. How environment writes instructions onto the genome without changing its letters. How memory, trauma, and resilience become embedded not just in the mind, but in the body itself. For now, understand this. You are not as fixed as you feel. The version of you that exists during calm is not the only version possible. There are configurations you have never met because life never demanded them. And when demand arrives, the body does not hesitate. It reaches for tools you didn't know you had. Pressure does not ask whether you are ready. It asks whether you are adaptable. And somewhere deep inside you, the answer has already been prepared. What if your experiences don't simply pass through you, but stay behind as instructions? Not memories in the emotional sense, but molecular notes written quietly into the body, changing how it responds the next time the world applies pressure. What if nothing you've lived through was ever truly over, because the body remembers in ways the mind never will? For a long time, biology told a comforting story. DNA was destiny, a fixed script handed down, unchangeable except by rare mutation. Your life, your stress, your grief, your fear, your resilience, these things shaped behavior, not biology. They influenced how you felt, not what you were. But that story has been slowly unraveling, and what's emerging in its place is far more unsettling. Inside every cell, your DNA is wrapped, folded, and tagged. Not randomly, precisely. Chemical markers attach themselves like bookmarks, flags, and locks. They don't rewrite the text. They decide which parts of the text can be read. This is not metaphor. This is measurable. These marks can amplify genes, silence others, or change how easily a cell responds to future signals. And the triggers for placing these marks are not abstract. They are lived experience. Stress leaves fingerprints. Prolonged fear alters hormone levels, and those hormones travel everywhere. Chronic uncertainty reshapes neural firing, and neurons communicate chemically with the rest of the body. Inflammation rises. Sleep fragments, metabolism shifts, and at the cellular level, the genome listens. It adjusts. It prepares for a future that feels dangerous, even if the danger is invisible. This means your body is not just surviving the present, it is forecasting the future based on what you've endured. If the world feels hostile for long enough, the body begins to expect hostility. If safety is rare, vigilance becomes the default. If loss is repeated, attachment patterns change. These shifts are not only psychological, they are biological. They influence how quickly stress responses activate, how long they last, and how intensely they fire. Over time, the system becomes tuned to a different baseline. This is why stress can feel like it rewires you, because it does. But here is the deeper implication. If experience can change how genes are expressed, then the boundary between environment and biology dissolves. Life does not simply act on you from the outside. It enters you. It writes itself into your tissues. And those instructions can persist long after the original event has ended. Some of these changes are adaptive. They make you faster, sharper, more resilient. Others are costly. They keep the body locked in a state of readiness long after the threat is gone. The same mechanism that once protected you can later imprison you. And the difference between awakening and entrapment may lie in whether the system learns flexibility or only fear. Think about how certain people seem unusually sensitive to stress, while others remain calm under pressure. This is not always temperament. Sometimes it is history encoded at the cellular level. A body that has learned the world is unpredictable prepares differently than one that has learned it is safe. Neither is wrong. Both are responding logically to the data they were given. This brings us closer to the idea of a forbidden layer. Not forbidden by design, but by cost. These deeper modes of biological operation require energy. They demand change. They destabilize equilibrium. Under stable conditions, the body avoids them. Under threat, it has no choice. And this is where awakening enters the conversation again. Many people describe awakening not as gaining something new, but as losing something old. Certainty, illusion, automatic patterns. Under intense stress, the brain's usual predictive models begin to fail. The stories it tells about the future no longer hold. When prediction breaks down, awareness is forced into the present. And in that forced presence, perception often sharpens. The mind becomes quieter not because it is peaceful, but because it is outmatched. Old narratives collapse under the weight of reality. And in the silence that follows, something else steps forward. A more immediate form of awareness. Less concerned with identity, more concerned with what is real right now. This shift is often described in spiritual language, but it aligns closely with what neuroscience observes under extreme conditions. When stress exceeds a certain threshold, default networks deactivate, self-referential processing quiets. Attention becomes raw, sensory, immediate. The sense of being a separate self can soften, sometimes dramatically. From one angle, this is a defense mechanism. From another, it is a doorway. If awareness can reorganize itself under pressure, why wouldn't biology do the same? The idea that there may be layers of human potential inaccessible to a comfortable nervous system is unsettling. It suggests that modern life, in its pursuit of safety and ease, may be narrowing the range of states humans are capable of entering. Not happier, not healthier, but less adaptable. At the same time, this does not glorify suffering. Pain is not wisdom. Trauma is not enlightenment. Stress without meaning can hollow a system out. But pressure paired with context, support, and recovery can catalyze transformation. The difference is subtle, but profound. Fire can temper steel, or it can melt it beyond use. The outcome depends on duration, intensity, and structure. Your body knows this. It calibrates constantly. It tests. It adjusts. It tries to predict what will be required next. And when stress becomes the dominant signal, the body begins preparing you for a harsher world, whether or not that world ever arrives. This preparation is not conscious. You do not choose it. It happens beneath choice, beneath language, beneath identity. Which raises a difficult question. If your current self is partly a response to past pressure, then who would you be if that pressure had never occurred? And equally important, who might you become if new pressure arrives? The forbidden layer, if it exists, is not a secret compartment hiding superhuman abilities. It is a set of configurations optimized for instability, modes of being that trade comfort for clarity, efficiency for adaptability, predictability for awareness. You may have brushed against this layer already, in moments of crisis, in times when everything familiar fell away, and you found yourself strangely calm, or painfully awake, or deeply present in a way that felt both terrifying and real. Those moments are not accidents. They are glimpses of how flexible the human system truly is. As we continue, we will explore how these biological marks can persist across time, how they may be passed down, and how the body can carry echoes of experiences it never consciously lived. We will examine the idea that some of what feels personal may be ancestral, and that awakening may not begin with you at all. For now, consider this. Your body is not a blank slate. It is a living archive. And every time life applies pressure, it does not merely test you, it records you. Have you ever noticed how stress doesn't just change how you feel, but how time itself behaves around you? Minutes stretch into hours, hours collapse into nothing. A single moment can feel endless, while entire days vanish without a trace. This distortion is not poetic exaggeration. It is one of the clearest signs that the system has shifted into a different operating mode. Under pressure, the brain stops measuring time the way it normally does. In calm states, your sense of time is outsourced to habit. Routine days compress because nothing demands attention. The brain predicts what comes next and skips the details. But stress disrupts prediction. It injects uncertainty, and uncertainty forces the brain to pay attention to everything. This is why dangerous moments feel slow, why accidents unfold frame by frame, why grief can stretch a single night into something that feels like a lifetime. The nervous system reallocates resources away from abstraction and into raw perception. Survival requires immediacy, and immediacy changes how reality feels. What's rarely discussed is that this temporal distortion doesn't stay confined to the moment of threat. Prolonged stress can recalibrate your internal clock permanently. Some people emerge from hardship feeling older than their years. Others feel strangely timeless, disconnected from linear progression altogether. The body adapts to a world where the future feels unstable, and in doing so, it alters how past, present, and future are experienced internally. Memory plays a central role here. Under stress, memory does not behave neutrally. Emotional intensity strengthens encoding. The brain flags certain moments as critical and preserves them with high fidelity. This is why traumatic memories can feel intrusive and vivid, while calm periods fade. But it also explains why moments of awakening, clarity, or insight during hardship can feel unforgettable. They are burned into the system because they occurred when the brain was fully awake. Memory is not a passive recording. It is a survival tool. It teaches the system what to watch for next time, and those lessons are not stored only in the brain. Stress hormones influence gene expression. Inflammatory responses alter cellular behavior. Neural activity communicates with the immune system and the endocrine system. Experience becomes chemistry. Chemistry becomes instruction. This is where the line between time, memory, and biology blurs. If stress alters how time is perceived, and time perception alters how memory is encoded, then prolonged stress is not just an emotional experience. It is a restructuring of how reality itself is processed. The world becomes sharper, louder, closer. The margin for error shrinks. The system becomes less tolerant of illusion. This is often experienced as anxiety, but anxiety is not the core process. Anxiety is the symptom of a system that no longer trusts the future to behave predictably. It stays alert because alertness feels safer than surprise. Yet, in some individuals, this same state produces something else, a kind of clarity, a stripping away of excess thought, a focus that feels almost meditative but charged. This is not relaxation. It is presence forged by necessity. When stress becomes sustained, the brain cannot remain in constant emergency mode without cost. So it adapts. It looks for efficiency. It simplifies. It drops non-essential processes. Identity narratives loosen. The mind stops rehearsing social scripts and future fantasies. Attention narrows to what is directly relevant. This can feel like losing yourself, or like finding something beneath yourself. People often describe a phase during prolonged hardship where their old concerns lose meaning. Status, comparison, long-term planning, even fear of judgment can dissolve. Not because the person has transcended ego, but because the system no longer has the energy to maintain it. Survival does not care who you think you are. It cares what works. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of awakening. It is not always gentle. It often arrives through exhaustion, through surrender, through the failure of familiar coping mechanisms. When control collapses, awareness takes over. From a biological perspective, this makes sense. The brain is a prediction machine. It constantly generates models of the future. Stress overloads these models with uncertainty. When predictions fail repeatedly, the brain shifts strategy. It stops predicting and starts sensing. Presence is not enlightenment, it is a fallback mode. But fallback modes are not inferior. They are older, more fundamental. They predate language, identity, and abstraction. And when accessed, they can feel profoundly real. This suggests something unsettling, that the state many people seek through meditation, philosophy, or spiritual practice is the same state the nervous system is forced into under sufficient pressure. The difference is consent and context. Under voluntary practice, the system eases into presence. Under stress, it is pushed. Both routes arrive at similar terrain. If this is true, then awakening is not an escape from biology. It is a feature of it. The body does not separate mind from matter the way language does. It treats consciousness as another tool for adaptation. When old tools fail, new ones are deployed. Awareness becomes sharper because it must. Attention becomes grounded because dissociation would be fatal. This also explains why some awakenings are destabilizing. Without preparation or integration, sudden presence can feel overwhelming. The loss of familiar identity can be frightening. The silence behind thought can feel like emptiness rather than freedom. And yet, for those who survive the transition, something changes permanently. They often report a different relationship with stress. Not because stress disappears, but because it no longer feels like an enemy. It becomes information. The body has learned something in the fire. From this perspective, the forbidden layer is not hidden in DNA alone. It is distributed across systems: genome, nervous system, memory, perception, time. All of it responds to pressure as a single integrated network. Stress compresses time, time reshapes memory, memory alters biology. Biology recalibrates awareness. Awareness changes identity. Nothing about this is accidental. As we move deeper, we will begin to examine the parts of the genome that remain poorly understood, the regions once dismissed as irrelevant, the sequences that do not code for proteins but regulate when, where, and how genes respond. We will ask why so much of our genetic material appears silent, and what kinds of conditions might give it a voice. Because if the body prepares for futures it has not yet seen, then silence does not mean uselessness. It may mean patience. And if awakening is a biological state as much as a philosophical one, then pressure may be the language that speaks to the deepest layers of who you are. There comes a moment, often unnoticed at first, when pressure no longer feels like something happening to you, but something happening through you. The struggle is still there. The weight has not lifted. Yet somewhere inside, a quiet division begins. One part of you reacts, another part watches. This split is subtle. It doesn't announce itself. It appears in small gaps, the pause before a thought, the space between fear and action, the strange calm that sometimes arrives in the middle of chaos when everything should be falling apart. Yet something inside remains steady, observant, almost distant. For most of life, these two parts are fused. The one who feels and the one who observes operate as a single voice. Identity feels solid, reactions feel personal, thoughts feel like truth. But sustained pressure begins to loosen that fusion. Not intentionally, not gently. It does so because the system can no longer afford inefficiency. Under prolonged stress, the brain starts pruning. It reduces internal chatter. It suppresses processes that consume energy without improving survival. Self-referential narratives, social anxieties, imagined futures, rehearsed regrets. These are metabolically expensive. When resources are scarce, the system trims them. And what remains is raw awareness. This is not mystical, it is functional. Awareness without commentary is faster, more adaptable, less fragile. It does not argue with reality. It registers it. People often describe this phase as feeling unreal, or detached, or strangely clear. The world appears sharper. Sounds feel closer. Emotions arise and pass without explanation. The familiar sense of me loosens its grip. This can feel terrifying or liberating, or both at once. From the outside, it may look like dissociation, and sometimes it is. But there is another possibility, one far less discussed, that this observer state is not a breakdown, but a fallback system, an older mode of consciousness that predates identity as we know it. Long before humans built stories about who they were, awareness existed as a tool, a way of tracking threats, reading environments, sensing opportunity. Identity came later, personality came later, culture came later. Awareness is foundational. Stress strips away the newer layers first. This is why intense pressure can make people feel as though they are watching themselves act. Not because they are broken, but because the system has temporarily reassigned roles. Reaction happens automatically. Observation monitors outcomes. Learning accelerates, and learning, in evolutionary terms, is survival. What's striking is how similar this observer state feels to descriptions of awakening across cultures and histories. A sense of distance from thought, a reduction in identification with emotion, an immediacy of perception, a feeling of being present without effort. The difference is context. One arrives through practice and safety, the other through necessity and threat. But the state itself may be the same. This suggests something unsettling, that the human nervous system carries within it multiple modes of consciousness, and the one we inhabit most of the time is not the most fundamental. It is simply the one best suited for social stability, long-term planning, and routine survival. Under pressure, that mode falters, and when it does, something deeper steps in. The forbidden layer may not be a single switch, but a hierarchy. When surface strategies fail, deeper strategies activate. When identity collapses, awareness remains. When narrative dissolves, perception sharpens. This does not mean the observer is superior, it is simply different. It does not care about meaning, it cares about accuracy. It does not ask why, it asks what is happening now. In many people, this state appears briefly during crisis and then recedes once stability returns. The system restores the old configuration because it is efficient and familiar. But in some cases, the observer remains accessible, integrated. The person learns to move between modes. These are often the individuals who emerge from hardship, changed in a way that is difficult to articulate. They are not invincible. They are not fearless. But they are less deceived by their own thoughts, less reactive to stress, more capable of sitting with uncertainty. This is not because they are stronger. It is because they have met a deeper layer of themselves and survived the encounter. Biology supports this interpretation. Prolonged stress alters connectivity in the brain. It can weaken networks associated with self-referential rumination and strengthen those associated with sensory processing and present-moment awareness. Hormonal shifts change emotional thresholds. Neuroplasticity allows new default patterns to form. In other words, the observer is not an illusion, it is a configuration, and configurations can persist. This reframes awakening entirely, not as an escape from the body, but as a state the body enters when certain conditions are met. Not as transcendence, but as reallocation. Awareness is not leaving the system, it is moving to the foreground. The danger, of course, is imbalance. Without integration, the observer can become detached, cold, or disconnected. Without meaning, presence can feel empty. Without support, clarity can become isolation. But when integrated, this state offers something rare: the ability to experience stress without being consumed by it, the capacity to feel deeply without drowning, the flexibility to adapt without losing coherence. Which brings us back to the genome. If consciousness can shift modes under pressure, if awareness can reorganize itself, why wouldn't biology mirror that flexibility? Why wouldn't the genome contain layers of regulation designed to support these shifts? Systems that activate not just to keep the body alive, but to keep the organism adaptable in unpredictable worlds. Evolution does not select for comfort. It selects for survival across variants, and variance demands flexibility at every level, from molecules to mind. The forbidden layer, then, may be less about hidden power and more about hidden resilience. A capacity to become different when being the same is no longer viable. You were never designed to be static. As we move forward, we will descend further into the genome itself, into the vast regions once dismissed as meaningless, into the regulatory networks that decide not what you are, but when you become it. We will explore why so much of human DNA appears silent, and what kinds of pressure might give it voice. Because if awareness has layers, and biology has layers, then awakening may be the moment those layers align, and pressure may be the force that brings them together. There is a part of the human genome that feels like a shadow, vast, quiet, and largely unread. For decades it was given a dismissive name, as if language itself wanted to look away. Junk. As though nature, so precise and ruthless, suddenly became wasteful. As though billions of years of refinement accidentally left behind something meaningless and forgot to clean it up. But biology rarely keeps what it does not use. More than 90% of your DNA does not directly code for proteins. It does not build muscles, enzymes, or tissues in the straightforward way we once expected. Instead, it regulates, it times, it amplifies, it silences, it coordinates. It decides when genes speak, how loudly they speak, and how long they remain silent. It is not the machinery, it is the command structure. Think of it not as junk, but as a dark library, shelves of instructions that do nothing until the right conditions are met, pages that cannot be read in ordinary light, chapters that remain sealed because opening them is costly, destabilizing, or unnecessary in times of peace. Silence does not mean absence. Silence often means restraint. In stable environments, restraint is efficient. The body conserves energy by running familiar programs. Growth, reproduction, maintenance. There is no need to explore alternative configurations when the current one works. But when the environment becomes unpredictable, when stress persists, restraint can become liability. Flexibility becomes more valuable than efficiency. And this is where regulation matters more than raw code. The regulatory genome is exquisitely sensitive to context. Hormones, inflammation, metabolic state, neural activity, even social environment can influence how it behaves. It listens not just to danger, but to duration. And not just to intensity, but to meaning. Acute stress triggers immediate responses. Chronic stress rewrites baselines. This means that prolonged pressure does not merely exhaust you. It teaches your biology something about the world it expects you to inhabit. If the world feels hostile, the genome prepares for hostility. If the world feels uncertain, it prepares for uncertainty. It does this not by changing the letters of DNA, but by changing access. Which genes can speak, which must stay quiet, which pathways are prioritized, which are suppressed. This is not destiny. It is adaptation. But adaptation has a cost. Running deeper programs consumes energy. Maintaining heightened awareness strains systems. Keeping repair mechanisms, active taxes, resources. These states are not meant to be permanent unless the environment demands them. This is why the forbidden layer remains forbidden most of the time, not because it is dangerous in itself, but because it is expensive. It destabilizes the equilibrium that allows long-term comfort. Yet when comfort is no longer an option, cost becomes irrelevant. Under sustained pressure, the genome shifts from efficiency to resilience. It prepares the organism not for ease, but for survival and variability. And variability is the defining feature of every era that shaped human evolution. This perspective reframes stress again, not as a flaw in modern life, but as an ancient signal, a message that says the old configuration may no longer be enough. And here is where the unsettling possibility emerges, that some of the traits we associate with awakening, depth, resilience, and even wisdom may be downstream effects of these deeper regulatory shifts. Not supernatural gifts, but biological states that arise when the system reorganizes itself around uncertainty. This does not romanticize suffering. Many people are damaged by stress in ways that never heal, but it does suggest that the human system contains pathways for transformation that only activate under specific conditions. And those conditions are rarely comfortable. The dark library exists for a reason. Throughout history, humans who lived on the edges of stability often became the carriers of new ways of seeing. Shamans, exiles, survivors, wanderers. Those pushed beyond the boundaries of normal social life. They did not choose pressure. Pressure chose them. And in many cases, it changed them in ways their societies could not easily understand. This is not mysticism, it is pattern. When systems are stressed, variability increases. New configurations are tested. Most fail, some succeed. The ones that succeed are remembered, not always consciously, sometimes biologically. This brings us dangerously close to inheritance. If regulatory changes can persist long-term, and if some of those changes can be passed down, then stress does not just shape individuals, it shapes lineages. It teaches bodies before minds are even formed, which means that some of what awakens under pressure may not be personal at all. It may be ancestral, a response refined across generations of instability, a readiness encoded not as a story, but as a predisposition. This does not mean you are doomed to repeat the past. Regulation is flexible. Context matters, recovery matters, safety matters. The same system that tightens under threat can loosen under stability. But the memory remains. The potential remains. The forbidden layer is not a switch you flip once. It is a range of configurations the system can access depending on what it believes the world requires. And belief in biological terms is not thought. It is chemistry. It is pattern. It is what the system has learned to expect. If awakening feels rare, it may be because the conditions that trigger it are rare, or because the modern world actively prevents them, smoothing out friction, numbing discomfort, anesthetizing uncertainty. Safety has its benefits, but it also narrows the range of states we ever experience. You cannot discover depths in shallow water. As we continue, we will explore how these biological memories can echo across generations, how bodies can inherit readiness, fear, sensitivity, or resilience without ever knowing why, and how awakening may sometimes be less about discovering something new and more about uncovering something old that has been waiting patiently for the right conditions to return. Pressure does not invent the code. It reveals what the system was always capable of running. There are states the body enters reluctantly, states it does not advertise, states that feel uncomfortable enough that most people spend their lives avoiding them, numbing them, or escaping them the moment they appear. And yet, again and again across cultures and eras, these same states appear at the threshold of transformation. Long before there were laboratories or scanners, humans noticed a pattern. Certain conditions change perception. Isolation, fasting, prolonged wakefulness, controlled pain, breath held to the edge of panic, extended silence, grief that stripped life down to its bones. These experiences were not sought because they were pleasant. They were approached because they did something to awareness. They altered the signal. From a biological perspective, these states share something crucial. They disrupt the body's usual equilibrium. They shift chemistry. Blood gases change, hormones rebalance, neural rhythms reorganize. The brain's predictive machinery falters. And when prediction weakens, awareness moves closer to raw sensation. The system stops rehearsing and starts listening. Breath alone is enough to demonstrate this. Slow, deep breathing changes carbon dioxide levels in the blood. That alters blood pH. That influences neural firing. That quiets certain networks and activates others. This is not symbolism. It is physiology. The body does not distinguish between stress induced by threat and stress induced by intentional practice. It responds to chemistry. Fasting does something similar. Glucose drops, ketones rise, inflammation shifts. The brain enters a different metabolic state. Attention sharpens. Thoughts simplify. Sensory awareness intensifies. Hunger is uncomfortable, but discomfort is precisely the point. The system is being nudged out of its default configuration. Isolation magnifies this effect. Without constant social feedback, the mind loses reference points. Identity, which is partly maintained through interaction, begins to loosen. Thoughts echo. Emotions surface without distraction. The system is forced to confront itself without noise. Grief is perhaps the most powerful of all. It is not chosen. It arrives uninvited. It strips away assumptions about control, permanence, and fairness. Neurochemistry shifts dramatically. Stress hormones surge, sleep fragments, appetite disappears, time collapses. And in the wreckage of certainty, awareness often becomes brutally clear. These states feel dangerous because they threaten the structures that keep identity intact. They dissolve familiar boundaries. They expose raw perception. And for a system optimized for stability, this feels like failure. But from another angle, it is adaptation. The nervous system is not designed to keep you comfortable. It is designed to keep you alive in changing environments. When conditions signal that the old strategies are no longer sufficient, the system explores alternatives. Some of those alternatives are uncomfortable. Some are destabilizing. Some feel like losing yourself. But losing the old configuration may be the price of discovering a more flexible one. This is why awakening narratives often involve surrender, not as an abstract concept, but as a biological necessity. The system exhausts its usual controls. Effort fails, resistance collapses. And in that collapse, something else takes over. The body knows how to operate without constant mental interference. It has done so far longer than conscious identity has existed. When pressure forces the handover, awareness drops into a more fundamental mode, less interpretive, more direct. This is not enlightenment, it is efficiency. And efficiency under threat looks a lot like presence. What makes these gateway states dangerous is not the state itself, but lack of integration. Without context, support, or understanding, the system can remain stuck in a destabilized configuration. Hypervigilance, dissociation, emotional numbness, the same pathways that open awareness can, when overactivated, fragmented. This is why pressure is not a teacher by default. It is a force. Whether it educates or injures depends on duration, intensity, and recovery. A system needs time to reorganize. It needs periods of safety to integrate what was learned under threat. When that integration happens, something remarkable occurs. The individual does not remain in survival mode. Instead, they gain access to it without being trapped by it. Awareness becomes flexible. Identity becomes less rigid. Stress no longer feels like annihilation, but like information. This is where awakening becomes less dramatic and more practical. Not a constant state of insight, but an expanded range of responses. The ability to remain present under pressure without collapsing. The capacity to feel deeply without losing coherence. The option to step back and observe when reaction would once have dominated. Biologically, this suggests that the system has learned to move between configurations rather than being locked into one. The forbidden layer is no longer forbidden, it is contextual, and context is everything. If awakening can be induced by chemistry, environment, and physiology, then it is not separate from the body. It is not an escape from biology. It is a mode the body enters when conditions demand it. This realization changes the question entirely. The question is no longer whether hidden layers exist. It is why they remain inaccessible most of the time, and whether modern life, in its effort to remove discomfort, has narrowed the conditions under which these layers can ever be reached safely. If the system is never challenged, it never adapts. If it is overwhelmed, it breaks. Somewhere between those extremes lies the threshold where transformation becomes possible, and that threshold is uncomfortable by design. As we move forward, we will examine how these states echo beyond a single lifetime, how bodies can inherit readiness, sensitivity, or vigilance without memory, how pressure leaves marks not just on individuals, but on lineages, and how awakening may sometimes be less about personal growth and more about ancestral continuity. Because if the body remembers what the mind forgets, then some of what wakes up under pressure may not belong to you alone. It may be something older, quieter, and far more patient. Sometimes the body reacts to a threat you cannot name. Your heart races in a safe room. Your muscles tense without danger. Your vigilance ignites in moments that seem ordinary, and you tell yourself it's irrational, that nothing is wrong. But the body is not confused. It is responding to information you may not consciously possess. This is where the story stretches beyond a single lifetime. Biology does not begin with you. It arrives carrying memory. Not memory as images or stories, but memory as readiness, as sensitivity, as predisposition. The body inherits not just traits, but tendencies, thresholds, default reactions to the unknown. Across generations, pressure leaves traces. When environments remain harsh for long enough, bodies adapt in ways that persist. Stress response systems become quicker to activate. Awareness sharpens earlier. The nervous system learns to expect volatility. These changes do not require conscious transmission. They are carried forward through regulation, not instruction. This means that some of what you feel under pressure may not be yours in the way you assume. It may be an echo, a resonance, a biological expectation shaped long before you were born. This idea unsettles us because it disrupts the narrative of individuality. We like to believe our struggles are personal, our awakenings unique. But biology suggests a deeper continuity. The body does not reset with each generation. It accumulates, it remembers. If your ancestors lived through famine, war, displacement, or prolonged uncertainty, their bodies adapted to those conditions. And some of those adaptations may still be active in you, not as fate, as potential. This does not mean you are trapped by the past. Regulation is flexible. Context can soften inherited vigilance. Safety can recalibrate thresholds, but the capacity remains. The system can still access those configurations if the environment signals that they are needed again. This reframes awakening in a profound way. What if awakening is not a personal breakthrough, but a biological response, resurfacing when familiar conditions return? What if the clarity, depth, and altered perception that emerge under pressure are not new states, but remembered ones? Old modes reactivated because the system recognizes the pattern. This could explain why certain individuals awaken rapidly under stress while others struggle. It may not be about strength or insight. It may be about familiarity at the cellular level. The body recognizes the terrain. There is something both humbling and empowering in this. You are not alone in your response to pressure. You are not failing because your nervous system reacts strongly. You are carrying history in your tissues, and history does not speak gently. It speaks urgently. At the same time, this inheritance carries wisdom as well as burden. The same system that prepares for danger also carries resilience, adaptability, the capacity to remain alert, present and responsive in unstable worlds. Traits that were once essential may feel out of place in times of comfort, but they become invaluable when stability fractures. Awakening, in this sense, is not transcendence, it is remembrance. The body remembers how to survive uncertainty. The mind, accustomed to comfort, often resists this remembering. It interprets heightened awareness as anxiety, stillness as emptiness, sensitivity as weakness. But these interpretations are cultural, not biological. From the body's perspective, awareness is a tool, sensitivity is information, stillness is efficiency. If awakening feels disruptive, it may be because it contradicts the expectations of a world optimized for distraction, a world that rewards constant stimulation, predictable routines, and surface-level engagement. The deeper states awakened under pressure do not fit neatly into such a structure. They ask different questions. They demand presence. They dissolve unnecessary noise. This is why many people who experience awakening through stress feel alienated afterward. They return to environments that have no use for what they've accessed. The clarity feels out of place. The silence feels awkward. The awareness feels heavy. Integration becomes the challenge. To integrate awakening is not to remain in heightened states permanently. It is to allow flexibility, to move between modes without fear, to use the depth gained under pressure without being consumed by it. This requires safety. It requires meaning. It requires understanding that the forbidden layer is not meant to dominate, but to supplement. It is a reserve system, not a replacement. When integrated, it offers something rare, the ability to face pressure without losing orientation, the capacity to feel deeply without collapsing, the strength to remain present when old identities fail. This is not enlightenment. It is maturity at the level of the nervous system. As we approach the later segments, the focus will shift toward choice, toward discernment, toward the line between awakening and entrapment, because the same pressure that reveals hidden capacities can also lock the system into survival if awareness is not brought to the process. The forbidden layer is powerful, and power without understanding is dangerous. The next step is not deeper pressure. It is clarity about what pressure has already revealed. There is a moment when the system reaches a crossroads. The pressure has done its work. The old configuration has loosened. Awareness has widened. Sensitivity has increased. And now, a choice appears, even if it does not feel like one. This is the most dangerous phase, because the same mechanisms that awaken clarity can also entrench fear. The same heightened awareness that reveals truth can lock the system into constant vigilance. The difference is subtle, and the body does not announce which direction it is taking. It simply follows the patterns that are reinforced. When stress first cracks identity, the system becomes malleable. Neural pathways are plastic. Emotional thresholds are adjustable. Meaning is unstable. In this state, whatever the mind feeds on becomes instruction. If interpretation frames pressure as proof that the world is hostile, the body learns hostility. If awareness is paired with curiosity instead of resistance, the system learns flexibility. This is not philosophy. It is conditioning at the deepest level. Under prolonged stress, the nervous system asks one relentless question: is this danger ongoing? If the answer remains yes, the system never stands down. Hypervigilance becomes permanent. The observer state hardens into detachment. Presence turns into numbness. What once felt like awakening becomes imprisonment. This is why some people emerge from pressure sharper and calmer, while others remain trapped in survival long after the threat has passed. The difference is not willpower. It is interpretation reinforced by repetition. Biology does not care about truth, it cares about prediction. Whatever pattern appears consistent becomes the assumed future. If stress is interpreted as meaningful challenge, the system adapts with resilience. If it is interpreted as endless threat, the system adapts with rigidity. Both are logical responses. One expands range, the other narrows it. This is where many awakening narratives quietly fail. They speak of opening, but not of closing. They celebrate intensity, but ignore integration. They mistake heightened states for endpoints, rather than transitions. Awakening is not the activation of the forbidden layer. It is the relationship you build with it afterward. The forbidden layer is powerful because it strips illusion. It cuts through noise. It reveals what matters when nothing else does. But if you try to live there permanently, the system pays a price. Depth without rest becomes exhaustion. Awareness without safety becomes anxiety. Presence without meaning becomes emptiness. The body is not designed to remain at maximum alert forever. Even the sharpest blade dulls if never sheathed. True integration means learning when to access depth and when to return to surface function, when to observe and when to participate, when to allow identity to dissolve and when to let it reform. Flexibility, not fixation, is the marker of a system that has learned from pressure rather than been dominated by it. This is where choice re-enters the picture. Not conscious choice at first, but micro-choices. How you respond to stress after awakening, whether you interpret sensation as information or as threat, whether you allow the observer to soften back into engagement, or whether you cling to it as armor. Clinging is understandable. The observer feels safe. It is untouched by emotion. It does not break easily. But safety purchased through detachment costs intimacy, meaning, and vitality. The system survives, but it does not live. On the other hand, returning fully to old patterns after awakening feels impossible. The illusion is gone. The noise is too obvious. The mind cannot unsee what it has seen. So the system must learn a third way, to move fluidly between depth and function, to let awareness inform action without replacing it, to allow sensitivity without surrendering stability. This is not mystical balance. It is neurological balance. Biology favors systems that can switch states appropriately. Fight when needed, rest when possible, observe when confused, act when clear. Problems arise when the switch gets stuck. Pressure can flip the switch open. Integration teaches you how to close it again without forgetting what was revealed. This reframes the forbidden layer one final time. It is not a destination, it is a resource. A reserve mode designed for instability, not a permanent residence. When treated as a tool, it expands life. When treated as an identity, it constricts it. Many people mistake awakening for an ending. The end of fear, the end of suffering, the end of confusion. But biologically, awakening is a beginning, the beginning of a more complex relationship with stress, awareness, and self. The system has learned that it can survive without the old illusions. Now, it must learn how to live without becoming armored by that knowledge. This is where the final question emerges, quietly but insistently. If pressure awakens something real in you, how do you carry that reality forward without needing to be broken again to remember it? That is not a spiritual question, it is a biological one. And it is where everything we have explored begins to converge. The body, the genome, awareness, memory, stress, choice. All of it leads to one final understanding, waiting just ahead. At the end of all this pressure, all this unraveling, all this unexpected clarity, something quiet remains. Not an answer, not a revelation that ties everything neatly together, but a recognition. A recognition that what you call yourself is not a fixed object, and what you call stress is not merely an enemy. You are a system that learned to survive by changing. When pressure entered your life, it did not ask for permission. It did not care about your plans, your identity, or the story you told yourself about who you were supposed to be. It arrived, disrupted the familiar, and forced the system to respond. And in responding, something ancient moved, something efficient, something honest. The forbidden layer was never a secret vault hidden from you out of malice. It was withheld by necessity, a reserve state, a deeper configuration designed for moments when the world stopped making sense and the old rules failed. You were never meant to live there permanently. You were meant to access it when needed, learn from it, and return changed. Pressure is not the fire you worship. It is the fire that reveals the shape of what you are made of. This is where the misunderstanding often begins. People search for awakening as if it were an object to possess, a state to maintain, a peak to live on forever. But biology does not work that way. Systems survive by oscillating, not by freezing themselves into extremes. Stability and instability are not opposites, they are partners. Awakening, in its truest sense, is not staying open forever. It is knowing that you can open. It is remembering that when certainty collapses, awareness remains. That when identity fractures, perception sharpens. That when comfort dissolves, adaptability steps forward. The danger was never awakening itself. The danger was mistaking the emergency configuration for your new home. The body does not want you to remain in survival. It wants you to be capable of it. This distinction matters. When integrated, what pressure reveals does not harden you. It softens your illusions. It teaches you where your real edges are. It shows you that fear is information, not command. That identity is a tool, not a prison. that awareness can widen without destroying your ability to function, love, and engage with the world. The deepest change is often subtle, a different relationship with stress, a shorter delay between sensation and understanding, a quieter mind in moments that once overwhelmed you. Not because stress is gone, but because it no longer feels mysterious. The body recognizes the signal. Awareness meets it without panic. You do not become fearless. You become less deceived by fear. And this is perhaps the final truth hidden beneath all of this. Pressure does not awaken you into something inhuman. It returns you to something deeply human, to a nervous system capable of presence, to a biology designed for adaptation, to an awareness that existed before the stories you tell about yourself. Modern life teaches you to avoid discomfort at all costs, to numb, distract, optimize, and escape. It treats pressure as failure, but evolution tells a different story. Pressure is how systems learn, how they refine, how they discover capacities that never emerge in stillness. This does not mean you should seek suffering. Fire is not a teacher you chase, but when fire arrives, you are not empty-handed. You carry within you more than you were taught to expect. The forbidden layer is not forbidden anymore once you understand it. It is contextual. It activates when the world demands more than the surface self can provide, and when integrated, it leaves behind a quiet strength, a grounded clarity, a knowing that whatever comes next, you are not as fragile as you once believed. You are not broken by pressure. You are informed by it. And perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this. The moments you thought were destroying you may have been moments your biology recognized as necessary, not because pain is good, but because growth requires thresholds, and thresholds are rarely comfortable. You were never meant to be untouched by life. You were meant to be shaped by it. If there is a hidden code, it is not written in mystery. It is written in responsiveness, in flexibility, in the body's refusal to remain the same when the world changes. Pressure did not awaken something foreign in you. It awakened what was always there. Waiting for the moment, comfort could no longer speak for you. And now that you have seen it, the task is not to chase it again through suffering. The task is to live with the understanding that you can meet pressure without losing yourself. Because you were never just surviving, you were learning how to become.